Welcome guys back to a new live video here on the Aviator 268 channel. We are at the airport in Samoa. I'm trying to get the correct name here because it's a kind of Faleolo. Yeah, there we go. Faleolo Airport in Samoa. I'm wondering if it's American Samoa, not even sure. But we're here at the gate, and apparently this airport is a bit weird. So you're seeing a jet bridge, but you're not seeing an actual building. But we're not going to let that stop us real quick. We're going to get right into getting into the aircraft and begin our flight. So let's jump right in and get the aircraft on and begin the boarding process. We're in the 737 right now, and so we are going to go back to the Boeing side of things. So for those persons who appreciate the Boeing aircraft, we are here in the Boeing 737 for Pmdg. Let's get this right here. Flight time today is going to be 2 hours and 1 minute. We will see if we can put the aircraft into a little bit of an overdrive so we can get there a little bit faster. All right, let's head back into the flight deck. Go into the aft overhead. Turn our IRS to nav so that could start itself out. Run through the scans, left panel. Jordan can now go on. The DC is on battery, AC is on ground power. We'll leave the signs off. Turn on the window heat. Everything as remains as is. Turn on the recirculation fans, and we'll leave the packs off. And we have a position light on there. That's going to take a little time, so we'll go ahead and put in the IRS, which is Nsfa, Nsfa, and we will use the GPS left, insert that, and we're good to go. This aircraft does not have the flight EFB, so we're going to set that up real quick. Equipment. Is it on the equipment? I do not remember. Yes, it is. Flight tablet. Yes. Cool. Leave everything as is. Okay. Hopefully that does not take too long to start. Welcome guys, welcome to the stream. It is good to have you. Trying to get this set up real quick so we can be on our way. How are you guys doing this evening, man? Hope you guys had a good day. Let's see if the right side is up. Okay, the right side is up. Let me see if I turn it off and turn it back on if that works, because I'm hoping that that's not going to give me an error there. So, flight tablet, no. Okay, so flight tablet, yes. Alright, so that's going to be a problem. Alright, we have the right side, so we're fine. Okay. So we go to our route and put that in the origin or request, and we use the SimBrief route and we'll set our route. While that is happening, let's go to the flight sim actions, ground, and we want to request the fuel truck. This is going to be slightly annoying because I have the thing set up for the left side EFB. Nevertheless, we'll work with it. Our fuel today is going to be 11,000 tons, or 11 tons. So let's put 11, what is it, 11,347. So 11,350. And so we see the truck coming up there. This particular truck is actually from Pmdg, so it doesn't look like what you may have seen with the GSX, and so it really is just going to animate. There's no animation really going on with this other than it just being there. So once it says it's ready, we can click start and continue with that. We'll load information on the left side, and here we go, we can start. So all we have here is that the panel is down, and that's there. There's no other animation where that is concerned. So that will continue to do that, and we will load this information here. Click on the departure, and we're using, let's see what our wind for today is. Current wind 020 at 07, so we're using 08 for departure, and our routing says that we're using the Uvut 1. The Avuti 1. So here we are. We have the Avuti 1 Romeo. So that will take off, make a left turn, then we go southwestwards via the Avutu and continue as file. So we do the Avutu 1 Romeo. Then we go back to our index, and we're going to use the RMP runway 20 via Matki, and the arrival is the Mika 2 Bravo, and that is via, let's see where it is via, no vias, so that should be as is here, and we can double check that via the primary flight display. So let's double check our route, and that looks about right. There we go. So we can now execute that, and our route is in 08 on the heading. We go ahead and call GSX to board so that we can get out of here on time.
Boarding requested.
QNH 1013. There's QNH on this side of the world.
Hello, Captain. We're ready for pushback.
Hey, what's going on, George? What's up? What's up?
Passengers boarding starting.
Let's get GSX. That's GSX there. Then we have Volanta. There we go.
Departure check completed. Bypass pin inserted.
Cool, cool. Good to have you in the stream. Good to have you in the stream. Just trying to get the aircraft set up here really quick. kind of going through a little bit more than a little bit quicker than I normally would. Just trying to get off the ground so that we can get the in-flight entertainment started. I'm actually curious to see this new video that Captain Mentor would have put there, so that I am actually anxious to see. So let's get this show on the road. Let's see, we still have probably one of the weirdest flights that I'm gonna do because of the airport not being the way it's supposed to. But that's neither here nor there, so we're good to go. So that is almost done. We're at 7 tons, so we have 4 more tons to go, and that will be done. So our route, we can go to our Perfinite. Flight level 360 is our flight today. Cost index of 50. Reserves is our reserves today. Where is that information now? Reserves. Here we go. Reserves 3.8. All at 4. And our zero fuel weight for today is supposed to be zero fuel weight of 59.3. 59.3. Execute. And we can now check out the performance. Leaving on a runway 8. Import from aircraft. We'll leave this at optimum. Our weather is here, and we calculate. Takeoff 51 degrees, 142, 43, 48. So takeoff 51, and we have flaps 5, 42, 43, 48. Trimmer 4.9. We will set that here shortly. To do that, we need to turn on the hydraulic pump, and we'll do that once our fuel is done and we can cut on the APU. Let's see if we have any issues with seated passengers. Yes, we do, and of course we do. So we will not be chilling in the cabin today, and I think that's because when I did not go into the GSX application and let it do its thing with this. So that's my fault, guys. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Come on, walk with your head up, man. Walk with your head up. Stop hunching your back, dude. Sorry, sir. Yeah. So even that flight lieutenant behind here is pink. But we'll be alright. Not that we need to be back there anyways. So just about finished with refueling. So let's look at our wait a minute. That is right. Didn't update this either. I have not flown the 737 in so long, guys. I really have not. So I forgot to update this. Okay, so we're all up to date now. That's crazy. See, that's what happens when you're trying to run through this whole thing. I totally forgot to do that. So let's see if our systems are still in place. Nope. So we have to redo everything. Fine, no problem. Let's go back. Ident. Here. Nsfa. Then we will. Okay, so that means we have to go back here and request the root. So now we request. There we go. Select routes. And I noticed that I didn't see this thing move either with the refuel. What's going on with GSX? So, you know what? That's all right. I'm not even gonna worry about that. I can't even be bothered. So I'm just gonna simply select the route from the menu here. So we'll go route request. Once that comes up and it's done, we'll just. I just can't. The arrival is RNAV20. Mark key. Check I wrote that. Activate. Double check so we don't have any issues on departure. Can't afford to be embarrassed with that. Okay, so that looks fine. Alright, so that's set. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the index, go to Posinit, route, and request, SimBrief, and I'm going to set the load so that that is inside of our FMC and payload. Good. So that's all checked out. Alright. Return ground services. We can release the fuel, and that is all set. So 36,000 feet is where we're going today. 50 on the cost index 4 and 50. Let's check it. 59.3, and that's set. Go back to our performance calculator. Runway 8, inputs, and calculate. Alright, so 50, 146, 47, 51, 50, 5, 145, 146, 47, 51, 146, 4751. Okay, cool. So we are finally done with that now. Everything is up to date. We're all we're supposed to be. So we can now do the departure briefing. So let's get the charts up. Departing off of runway 08 via 1 Romeo. Where's the Romeo? Here we go. Right. Uvuti 1 Romeo. Alice 08. Then for the arrival, we have the yes. And we're using the RMP 20. Cool. All right. So we're departing from Faleolo, and we will push back start, make a right onto Bravo, then we'll backtrack onto runway 08. This is a very small airport, so we will push back, use Bravo, backtrack to runway 08, turn around, take off, and our departure SID is going to take us the Uvutu 1 Romeo, turn left direct to Foxtrot Alpha 386, and that's to here. So track 218 to Ovutu, and then from Ovutu en route. There's no there's no top altitude, so we just climb straight up to flight level 360. No immediate threats. Once we take off, we're over water in between the two islands, and we remain over water until we get to our destination. In the event that we have to return, we are below our max landing weight. Turn on the seatbelt sign, and we will start the APU. Right, so we're below our max landing weight, so if we have to come back for whatever reason, we will just make a downwind and come back around to runway 08 after checking to make sure that we have everything under control. So for our departure, once again, we're going on runway 08. Out of below V1, we will close the thrust levers, and come to complete stop. If we don't have any major issues, we just make a right onto Bravo and go back to the gate. If everything is alright, we just come back around and backtrack to runway 08 to attempt another departure. After V1, we're coming to the takeoff. We climb up to 3,000. Assess the situation. If anything, we need to return, then we will definitely make the downwind and use ILS runway 08 for arrival. Aircraft should be in good shape, so we shouldn't have any issues. However, anything can happen, so we just look out for that. If there aren't any questions, we are good to go. I need to now log into vPilot, FJI254, using the 738 FHJQ, and we're now connected. Cool. So 150. Hey, what's going on, Msfs? What's up? What's up? Welcome to the stream, bro. 151, and our heading is 077, and that is set, and we're good to go. Flight level 360 is our cruise, so again, there's no top altitude on the chart, so, and there's no ATC, so we just set flight level 360 on our departure, on our altitude window. We will arm both LNAV and VNAV. APU is available, so we'll switch the buses to APU. Open up the packs and the APU bleed as well. And we will dismiss the... Since PMDG has given us the ground connections on the EFB, we will release the air condition unit, and just like that, our boarding is done. Therefore, we can go ahead and release the ground power as well, since we're now on APU. Great. Seatbelt signs are on, so we are good to go. Parking brakes also available, so that is great. Cool. Overhead panel is set. And okay, so disconnecting. Good. Our doors are closed. Nope, we have forward entry still open. I believe once I call for the pushback that it should close. So let's check that. Is it gonna close it? Is it gonna close it? Door management, is it gonna close? Yes. So it is closed. Perfect. Nose right facing west. Alright guys, we are about to push out the gate, so let's get the aircraft prepped. Overhead panel is set, beacon coming on, and we can set our trim to 5 units, and we're good to go. Stand by 1 second, guys. My ACARS is giving just a little bit of chance, so just give me just a moment. Let me address that real quick. I need to restart that, so give me just 1 second real fast. Just need to check this ACARS. Alright, so we will release the chocks. Let's see where we are. Ground, remove chocks.
Release parking brakes.
And we will start the time on the right side. And parking brakes are released.
All engines clear. Start at will.
Faleolo traffic. FJI254 push to start from gate 1. We'll enter batch out runway 08 via Bravo. Faleolo traffic. Pressure, yes, boy. What's going on, Bajan Place Butter? You have to call these people name right, yes? Alright, turn off the packs. Start sequence is 2, then 1. Hopefully GSX does not do any shenanigans. And again, please forgive me with this whole airport that doesn't have... What in the world? Okay. We're going to just let GSX do its thing. 25%, and we have introducing the fuel. I did say nose right, so let me see what it's going to do. Because GSX has a mind of its own sometimes. Okay, there we go. Hey, what's going on, Jared? Yeah, it's a beautiful day to fly indeed. So on the other side of the world, it is daytime, so I gave you some nighttime last stream, so doing something a little bit different. Start switch is cut out, so let's start engine number 1. And we'll wait for 25% N2, then start switches will come up. Not start with the fuel switch would be coming up. Trying to retrain your brain now to what are you doing? What are you doing? 25. Of course this is GSF would do what it feels like doing.
Set parking brakes.
Parking brake is set. Once starter cut out, we will turn on the center fuel pumps since we have fuel in the center tank. Starter cut out. Turn on the brake field, the fuel cross fuel feed, and we'll have Gen 1 and 2 up. In the overhead panel, we will turn on the probe heat, the other electrical pump, and we will turn back on the packs Isolation valves will come on, and APU bead is off. Zonal temp is running hot apparently, and this is one of the reasons why we don't really care for the 737, because so these two caution lights are on, but what is it really telling? Is it too hot, too cold, what? So it's just that you have to think about it and think what it's going to tell you. The current temperature right now is, let's see, current temperature outside is 31, so maybe it's too warm. So we turned it down. Let's see if it actually goes out. Let's see if it actually goes out. All right. So we have Pmdg on the left side here, and he is waving, so we're good. Turn off the APU. Start with this continuous. Turn on the taxi lights. Let's do our checks. Rudder left, rudder right, neutral, yoke left, yoke right, fully back, fully forward, and our controls are free and clear. Flaps 5 for departure. Hear those flap whine. Cool. Flap 5 is set and green light. And we are ready for taxi. Parking brakes is released. Breakaway thrust. And let's go. So once again, we're going to take Bravo. I really don't like the fact that this thing is over here, but we can't do any better right now unless we restart the sim, and we're not doing that. We are not going to do that. So we're going to taxi, make a right on Bravo, and then down towards runway 08. So welcome aboard, guys. Something new. Fiji Airways. I like to share what we're going to do for this flight. Once we get airborne, we're going to get our in-flight entertainment, and today in-flight entertainment is coming to us from Mentor Pilot. There is a new flight that he has out, and so we want to watch that to see what he's talking about with an Airbus. Runway entry procedure, and we will turn on the strobes. Clear right, clear left. Reviewing our departure, we departed of the Avuto 1 Romeo, take off left towards Foxtrot Actual 386, and then we will make a left towards Avuto, then flight plan route. Up, take off, left towards 386, then left towards Avuto, Avuto Romeo 1 Romeo, then flight plan route. And if we have any issues below V1, we will come to a stop on the runway, close the thrusters, thrust levers, and we will assess the situation. If we have to return to the gate, we do a gate return. Otherwise, we will come around on Bravo, then to Alpha, backtrack runway 08, and try for a second departure. If after V1 we have a problem, we will continue to take off, climb to 3,000 feet, make a left turn downwind, and with assess the situation, we are well below our landing weight. Therefore, we'll just come back around and use the ILS runway 08 for landing on 08. Once we land, we will come to a stop If the situation is dire enough that we have to stop, we'll make sure we call Mayday, Mayday, and get some assistance once we land. If not, we'll just turn right off on Bravo and taxi to the gate. So our review is complete. Once we get to the bottom of the runway, we'll turn around and do a rolling takeoff and get off this island. Pmdg does not allow for this one to be removed, so I can't just move this one since it's not functional. Hopefully that's something we can suggest to them. If they can put them independent of each other, where I could just remove one, especially if one is not functioning. We'll see. Even going at 23 knots, you would think we get to the end of the runway, right? We're getting there, guys. We're getting there. Follow traffic. FJI254 will take off runway 08. Follow traffic. Should have taken the comment a long time ago, but they'll just be in their seats. We'll pretend that they would let us know they're in their seats already. Pretty good. Going down, Captain. We are ready. No problem. Slow down 10 knots so that we don't skid this tire. Make the turn. Follow traffic. FJI254 takeoff runway 08. Follow. Start the timer. And let's go. 50%. Pressure on the yoke. 50% toga. Let's go, chat. Thrust set 94.4. Airspeed alive. 80 knots. Check. Check. Thrust hold. V1 rotate. Pause the rate of climb. Gear up. Woo, this wind is not playing. Gear coming up. And we're away. That wind is not playing. Okay. That wind did not want me to show you the aircraft outside, guys. Got buffeted right there. Isn't that nice? Look at that. That's a beautiful picture right there. Look at the water looking so... Let's focus here real quick. Sorry. It's not like the Airbus where it would stay like it's supposed to, so I gotta be very careful of that. 3 check flaps 1. But that does look really nice, guys. Look at the water. Reminds you of the tropics, right? Speed check, flaps up. After takeoff checks. Follow traffic, FJI254 current runway passing 3,200, climb to 5 over 360, On course. By the traffic last call. Passing 3,500. Make left turn now. Direct the Foxtrot Alpha 386. And my A-Cars is gonna cry because I went over 250 knots. Wow. Let's get back on profile here. This is really pressure, boy, Bajan. Bajan, you're calling pressure on me, man. Good, we're getting back under 250, below 10,000. And the reason why this is happening, guys, is because I'm hand flying the aircraft. So that's one of the reasons why the speed would have gotten away from me a while ago. Aircraft just wanted to fly. There we go, back on profile. So we at 250 knots now. And we're heading towards Foxtrot Alpha 386. That wind seems to just be pushing us over and all over the place. Once we get to 10,000 feet, we will then engage the autopilot and allow the aircraft to fly. 10,000 feet, landing lights coming off, star switches can come off, wing lights come off, and engage the command A. And we are off. Faliolo is off to the left side. Looking really good. The one thing that I'm trying to figure out as well is with this, the way in which the wings bounce or the wings flex. The other airlines or aircraft that have been created, the fly-by-wire and the Phoenix, they said that they use some sort of custom physics. So I'm not sure if it's the same thing that PMDG would have done. I can't remember if that's something that they said. But the wing is bouncing just a little bit too much. And that's just my view. That's just my view. Just bouncing a little bit. It's like it's flapping a wing. Well, it is a wing, but it's flapping just a little bit too much. I'm not certain if that is just how the turbulence is acting right now, since we can't really feel it, so to speak. But that's a bit too much for me. I don't know what you guys think. Does that look realistic or no? So, ding the cabin, we are above 10,000 feet. So they'll be back there doing their thing. And we have now crossed the transition altitude, transition level, so standard set on both sides. Wind request on the right side. The I didn't check that. So that would have been 13,000. Okay, so PMDG has it automatically set. So 13,000 was the actual transition level. So that's cool. Execute that, and so now we will go to our descent, forecast, load, and we'll get a more accurate reading for that. Execute it. So we should be landing in Nandi with 6.2 tons. Current time now is 0022. So in exactly an hour and a few, we'll be landing in Nandi. So 0203 is the estimated arrival time, which is in just under 2 hours. So we're passing that island that's on the right side of Faleolo. And so for the rest of the flight, it really is going to just be water. It will just be water. So what we'll do once we get to cruise, like I said, guys, is we're going to be looking at a video from my good mentor. And that will be our Nsfa entertainment for today. So let's just enjoy some music as we climb to cruise. Today is November 12th, and the very next thing that should be coming out very shortly, which is next week, Tuesday, a week from today, guys, is Microsoft 2024. I saw something on Twitter which suggested that the times were, the release times are available, so let's check that out real quick. Let's see what the Twitter is saying to us right now. Microsoft 2024 launch times confirmed. The question is, do you need to move to Kiribati this year to fly or play it early? Let's see what it says. Alright, so we live... Alright, let me open it on this website so we can see what we're talking about. Microsoft launch times. So... no need to try and change your computer time to Kiribati this time. You won't be getting the simulator any earlier than anyone else, unlike the Great Remarry in 2020. Instead, the launch would happen for most players on November 19, 2020 as planned. A full list of locations from geographic infographic is below. So, we live in, well, where I am on the New York time. So by 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're on the Atlantic Standard Time really, but we will get this, or it will be available for us by the 11 a.m. mark. So we're hoping, I may just go ahead and get it. So we'll look out for that. I doubt that they'll be streaming it on Tuesday of next week. I've been trying to keep it consistent with Tuesdays, so I doubt I'll stream it next week. I'm gonna have to check it out first. What I really want to check out is the Airbus A330s to see how those fly, and that will be a game changer for me. The A350 that we saw from Inibills, they would have said, where is it? This was the 9. So they would have said in their stuff that they may delay it if they need to. So we're not sure if how. Hopefully that before the end of the year is when the A350 will be released, as that's the primary reason why I would switch over to, not necessarily switch, because apparently you're able to use both, and that's really cool, because then you'll be able to fly the aircraft you want to fly. For example, the 777, the A380. Even though they say that these airplanes are compatible out of the box over in 2024, come on, we all recognize as well that the 2024 has new engines. There are certain things that are there that are not in 2020. So the visuals and all them kind of things, I'm pretty sure would not be the same. I may try it. Of course, I know that there are going to be some early adopters that will definitely stream this thing. So we'll definitely be able to see it from them exactly what it is that's about, all the hype, if the hype is what it's supposed to be. Once the other developers would have gotten their hands on the SDK, that will then determine how best we can, or how long we'll have to wait for the updates for 2024. That way we can put to bed 2020, I suppose. However, one of the reasons why we keep 2020 is because my favorite airplane, the 757, that's coming over 2020 first. So 2020 will still be around for a little bit. So we definitely look forward to that. Just yesterday, FS Labs, which would have been one of the aircraft that we had for P3D, one of the most sophisticated Airbuses for P3D was FS Labs, and it was really interesting that you didn't hear anything about them for 2020, and now apparently there's some teasers with them coming out with an A321 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Personally speaking, I would not be buying FS Labs. The reason for that is I believe, from my point of view, people will have their own opinions, of course, but I strongly believe that Phoenix has done an impressive job with their Airbus series, and the only thing that will make them different, meaning Phoenix, is they do to bring on a wide body. In my view, if FS Labs really wants to make a footprint, yes, I know competition is important, I know healthy competition is all that great, but I believe that if they were to put out a heavy body, wide body, that's FS Labs. If FS Labs was to put out an A330 or an A340 or something like that, I believe that is where they will seriously have a foothold in the market. Because the only A340 that's available right now is the one from Latin VFR, I think it is. And Latin VFR is nowhere close to being study level. They're functional, but they're not study level. And just recently they would have put out a promotion, not a promotion, but an announcement rather, on their Facebook page that they're doing some hard work behind the scenes for over a year now, I think it is, with them trying to deal with the avionics and all the different things that would make it even more flyable on the network, especially doing things like holes and so on. So when Aerosoft would have brought out the A330, which everybody only had negative comments to make, outside of it looking great, the negative comment was that it can't do certain things on the network. And most of us, when we're flying on the VATSIM network or the IVA or Pilot Edge. And if you're flying in an airspace where it's a bunch of traffic and air traffic control tells you need to hold a particular waypoint and you can't even do that, then it really renders the simulator at a disadvantage. So hopefully Aerosoft will sort that out within the coming months, coming days, however long it takes them. And with the advent of 2024, I don't think anybody really wants to even mess with that, simply because you will have an Airbus A330 suite. Imagine having an Airbus A330 200 and 300. When Aerosoft actually talked about the A330s, they said from the jump that they were going to give us the A330, Rolls-Royce, General Electric, and Pratt & Whitney's together. Now they would have changed again, and it really this plays into the whole ideology of something where money is concerned, you know, you've been hearing on the social media, it's touted that they've run out of money. That's what it's alleged. So I don't want anybody saying that Aviator 268 is saying, no, it's alleged. That's what they're saying on the social media, that they have run out of money. If you would have stated before that it's for 2020, then you bounced to saying it was 2024 only. Then all of a sudden you push it out to 2020. Then you only have one. Now, generally, when it came out initially for P3D, it was only Rolls-Royce. Now, they said they were going to do Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney, and General Electric. And when they brought it out, it was the Pratt & Whitney, I think it was, that came out first. And then on top of that, you then say that you're going to charge a $5 or £5 for the other two variants. Now, I believe that's a slap in the face for the community, because initially you said you're going to give us all three. Then you only produce one. And then when you do produce it, your aircraft is lacking, for lack of a better term. So with that in the mix, that's leaving a lot for simmers to be desired. And I think any bills would have now kicked that out the market, where once A3, the 2024 is launched, and we have the suite of A330s. Let's see if I can get that up again. Where you have a suite of A330s from the jump. That is really going to put a damper on Aerosoft where that is concerned. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So let's see here. The Aviator, Premium Deluxe, the Standard. All right. So here we have it. We have the different tiers. So you have Standard, Deluxe, Premium Deluxe, and Aviator. So when we look on this image, right here we have so this is the standard version, and this is what you're getting. So you see the new ones. So the Aero Elvira is new, the Air Tractor is new, the Airbus U10 has been there, the Neo is there. There's going to be an Airbus A321 LR, that's new. Then we have the Airbus A330, so you get a 200, a 300, a 300 freighter. Who's going to need Aerosoft when it comes to that? And if it's any bills, their Airbus that they came out with, the Neo that they came out with for 2020, was pretty good based on other reviews from real world pilots. So it's going to be an exciting time, especially for that. Then you also have the A330 Beluga. So, you know, we get in some good stuff in the new simulator. There's also going to be the, let's see if I can find it, the Max. Don't know how high fidelity this is going to be. We just have to wait and see that. So that's what I'm excited about, guys. I'm really, really excited about that. And you get all of this. These airplanes are what you get for the standard version, and the standard version is $70. Then you have the Premium Deluxe, which is going to give you the planes, and that would be the Airbus helicopter, the Beechcraft, the Boeing Company 747-4 global super tanker. So it's not necessarily this is not going to be the actual passenger jet. Then you also get the Boeing Company Dreamlifter. This would be cool to have, but of course you got to spend a little bit of money for that. And then of course the Dreamliner is going to be in that section. You also get the Globemaster C-17. That would be cool. And the Pilatus PC-24 as well comes with the Deluxe. For the that's the Premium Deluxe. For the Deluxe version, there is only the Cessna 408 that will be there, and the Cessna 404 Titan. That's for the deluxe. So the premium deluxe we're gonna get those others, and then for the Aviator now, let's see what's new in that. Okay, not seeing anything new yet. The ATR comes with that, but I'll have my ATR since I bought it before. And of course, what they said was, if you had the premium deluxe for 2020, then you're able to port those over to 2024. So I'll still have my ATR as well. But again, even if it does not work, it's okay because we got our 2020. And then you also get the Antonov 225 if you were to get the Aviator. But my thing is, I'm not going to fly half of these things, so I'll just get the standard and be done with it. I believe what they said as well is that if you don't want the Aviator set, you can also purchase the airlines that comes. For example, if you want to get the Premium Deluxe, which will give you let's see here, to give you these aircraft, then for sure you can just pay for it. So all these are things you can think about, but definitely we will see how that goes next week. All right, so enough chatter. Let's now come to our in-flight entertainment, and we're gonna look at Death Trap, the strange story of Air France flight 736. So we'll pause the music and start our video.
You always assume that the pilots of your aircraft are taking safe decisions based on industry best practices as well as their own experience. But what happens if those two things start working against each other? Stay tuned. In the evening of December 31st, 2020, an Air France crew was getting ready to operate Flight 736 back from Brazzaville in the Republic of Congo to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. They had spent their layover in Congo and was now eager to get back home, especially since it was New Year's Eve, but also because the conditions in Congo were still a bit complicated in regards to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and also due to widespread violence in parts of the country, which had led to several countries actually imposing travel restrictions there. This fact was likely in the back of the pilots' minds as they were going through their planning documents before the flight. They had several alternates available to them along the route, but would definitely prefer not to use them. The good news, though, was that the weather, both at their departure airport, along the route, and at their destination, looked fine for this time of year. And as they were looking through the NOTAMs, that's the documents provided to highlight any deficiencies in airports they might use, these looked reasonably good as well. There were, as always, some minor points highlighted, but those were mainly focused on the en route alternates, and as I mentioned, the pilots had no intentions of visiting one of them if they could avoid it. The flight time was planned to be quite long on this flight, so the flight crew had also been augmented with an extra pilot to enable some in-flight rest for them along the way. So once the pre-flight planning was completed, the three pilots decided on a final fuel of 45.5 tons and then headed over to their cabin crew colleagues to brief them about the flight. Like I mentioned before, this flight took place during the pandemic, so there were only 136 passengers booked, and that likely meant that the 8 cabin crew were expecting a quite relaxed flight home towards Paris. And it is also worth mentioning here that among those passengers there were 2 Air France maintenance technicians traveling home for the holidays. Anyway, since there was no significant weather expected along the route and nothing else out of the ordinary, the pilots soon finished their cabin crew briefing, and together they all started proceeding out towards the aircraft. The captain was a very experienced 54-year-old with close to 12,400 hours on total time logged. He had started his career in the military before joining Air France in 2002, and he had then gotten his command on the Boeing 737, flying for Air France's subsidiary Transavia, where he stayed for about 4 years before finally being transferred back to main Air France again. And he had started flying the Airbus A330 as a captain only about 8 months before this flight. This meant that although he had over 3,800 hours of total experience on that type, only 80 of those had been operated as a captain. The two first officers that he was going to fly with had very similar experience as the captain. Both of them had started off in the military, and the one who was going to start off in the right seat on this flight was 53 years old and had a total experience of 5,656 hours. This meant that he was pretty experienced overall, but only 550 of those hours had been flown on the Airbus A330. The relief pilot was 54 years old and had 4,800 hours in total. He was slightly more experienced on the Airbus A330 with 803 hours, but on top of that, he had also worked as a synthetic flight instructor or a simulator instructor on that same type for Airbus. But in any case, the absolutely most experienced on board was the senior purser, who was 57 years old and had amassed a staggering 16,400 hours across several different types. And her experience will soon become very apparent. As the crew walked out towards the gate, they could soon see their shiny Airbus A330 gleaming in the apron lights, waiting for them with all sorts of catering.
Is that to suggest that the purser is also a pilot since she has these ratings? That's crazy. But that's cool.
1,400 hours across several different types. And her experience will soon become very apparent. As the crew walked out towards the gate, they could soon see their shiny Airbus A330 gleaming in the apron lights, waiting for them with all sorts of catering, baggage and fueling activity going on around them.
And again, this is what I want to do, guys. I can't wait until 2024 drops so I can get to fly the Airbus. There's so many rules that you could use with these, and I like to fly real world, so it's pretty cool that you now can fly the 330s, the 330-200s and 300s, especially for people like Air France, KLM, some other guys who fly the even retro flights for American. You know, you using that from out of Philadelphia and Charlotte. That would also be, you know, just watching these things makes me I'm excited for 2024, guys. Excited. Anyways, back to the video.
18 years old at the time of this flight, and it had recently gone through some heavy maintenance over in China, where among other things, the engines had been removed and subsequently refitted again. Now, for this to make any kind of sense to you, and before we continue, it's important to explain a few things here about the Airbus A330 fuel system in general, and this engine refitting procedure in particular. You see, the fuel system on the Airbus A330 is quite complex. It is made up by two tanks in each wing, plus a center fuel tank in the belly between the wings, and something known as a trim tank in the aft horizontal stabilizer. Inside of the inner tanks in each wing, there are so-called collector cells, from where the fuel is drawn down through the main fuel hoses in the pylons and then into the engines. And that means that every time that the engine has to be removed, those main fuel hoses also has to be disconnected. The problem, though, was that the components used to reconnect those hoses were known to be really fiddly, hard to work with and prone to misalignment. Specifically, a part known as the flange had a tendency to not be seated correctly together with the other connection parts, and if this wasn't noticed when the fuel hose was then reconnected, well, then the bolts used to make sure that the part sealed correctly could be fastened to the correct torque value, only to later become completely loose when this flange would vibrate back into position again. But like I mentioned, this was a known problem, and Airbus had highlighted this issue in their aircraft maintenance manual already back in 2015. In fact, the original flanges had actually been replaced by an updated version, which was smaller and easier to fit in place. But it wasn't yet mandatory to replace all of them. Instead, the old flanges could continue to be used for as long as they were still in stock. Another thing that's worth understanding here is that since this aircraft is very big and the different fuel tanks are located in different parts of the aircraft, there's also quite a bit of tubing required. And obviously, it's super important to control exactly where the fuel is at any given time, especially during takeoff and landing, since several tons of fuel in, for example, the horizontal stabilizer will have a big impact on the aircraft's center of gravity. Because of that, the Airbus A330 is also equipped with something known as a fuel control and monitoring computer, or FCMC. And this one automatically transfers fuel between the different tanks depending on the phase of flight and how much fuel is being used. For example, the FCMC will start an automatic fuel transfer from the inner tank to the trim tank in the tail whenever the aircraft climbs through flight level 255, and then it will do a similar but reverse transfer during the descent. It will also transfer fuel between the center and wing tanks on regular intervals, and all of this is happening without pilot input under normal circumstances. But one thing that is really important to understand here is that if the pilots for whatever reason would move the engine master switch to off for an engine, at any point this would close the fuel valves providing fuel to that effective engine, effectively removing the fuel completely from it. Remember that. In any case, this was definitely not something that these pilots were thinking about when they arrived to the aircraft and loaded up their pilot bags into the cockpit. During the walkout, they had decided that the first officer would be pilot flying to start with and the captain pilot monitoring. The captain would then be the first one to go for his rest once the aircraft was nicely established in the cruise, and the relief pilot would then take his place. Now, we don't know who did the walk around, either the captain or the relief pilot, but we do know that nothing out of the ordinary was noticed during that check. The aircraft looked perfectly fine outside, and this was also true for the technical log, which showed no open technical defects. So the pilots just continued setting up their aircraft for departure, whilst the cabin crew welcomed the passengers on board. Everything was running like clockwork, and as soon as everything was done, Air France Flight 736 requested pushback and soon began taxiing out for departure. All checklists were then completed as per standard operating procedures, and at time 21:13, the first officer moved to thrust levels forward and the giant Airbus A330 started accelerating down the runway. But unbeknownst to the crew, something had now started happening inside of the left-hand engine, something that would soon make their lives much more difficult. The takeoff and initial climb were completed without the pilots noting anything out of the ordinary, and they soon received their clearance to climb to their final cruise level, flight level 380 or 38,000 feet. Now, since they only had 136 passengers on board, they were quite light and could therefore climb immediately up to this level, reaching it after only about 35 minutes of flight. And when they... This is so annoying. For a while now, I've been receiving these spam messages, robocalls and text, and initially I couldn't figure out why that was suddenly happening. As it turns out, much of these are driven by data brokers, companies that profit from selling personal information like our names, addresses, birthdays, and even our browsing histories. Now, they sell this to corporations, banks, and even cyber criminals, depending on who pays the most, and all of this is completely legal, unless you opt out of it. The problem is that you have to do that individually, which each and every one of these brokers, and there are a lot of them. But here is where today's sponsor, Incogni, comes in. Once I signed up to them, they started contacting all of these data brokers and forced them to remove all my data, and they will then continue to monitor their compliance for as long as I stay with them. When I connected to their dashboard, I was shocked to find out that my personal data was being sold by over 100 different companies. No wonder I was getting spammed. But Incogni's digital army are now taking care of all of that for me, and if you are interested in getting that same help, then go to incogni.com/pilot and use the code PILOT to get an awesome 60% discount on their annual plan. Thank you, Incogni. Now let's get back to the story. After the aircraft had leveled off at flight level 380, the captain started his routine cruise checks. This is something that the pilot monitoring normally does, and it includes filling in the flight plan, updating things like off-block and takeoff times, and also the first fuel check. This check is done by comparing the expected fuel used with the actual, through verifying how much fuel is left in all of the various tanks. And we then do these fuel checks whenever we pass certain waypoints, but at a minimum every 30 minutes throughout the flight. The reason we do these checks is to make sure that we catch any discrepancies early, so we can start dealing with them. Obviously, it's super important to keep track of our fuel usage to make sure that we can reach our destination with the required minimum margins available, but it's also important because any significant deviation from the planned fuel use could be an indication of an impending engine issue. or a fuel leak. When the captain did this first check, he immediately noticed that there seemed to be around 1.4 tons of fuel missing. This was obviously not good, but it also didn't bother him too much at this point. You see, the top of climb fuel check can be notoriously unreliable, since the location of the top of climb often differs due to unexpected level-offs, reroutings and weather diversions. But in this case, they had received a straight climb without any issues, so that shouldn't really be the case. Instead, the captain thought that maybe the true fuel quantity was a bit higher if the aircraft was doing one of those fuel transfers, because when that happens, quite a big amount of the fuel can be hidden inside of the fuel lines as it's being transferred and moved between the tanks. So he wasn't very worried. Instead, he told his colleagues about the issue, asked them to monitor the fuel state closely, and then went back to the crew bunk to start his scheduled rest period. Now, if you think that it sounds a little bit strange that the captain reacted this way, I would tend to agree. A 1.4 ton discrepancy is quite big, and if it would actually turn out to be a problem, they would at this point be in a really good position to just turn back to Brazzaville to get the problem investigated instead of continuing to fly north. An Airbus A330 normally burns between 4 to 5 tons of fuel per hour, so that meant that they were now missing close to 15 minutes of fuel. But given his reaction, I am guessing that the captain had probably seen similar numbers before and had good reasons to be as calm as he was. Like I said, they really wanted to get home this evening. In any case, as it turned out, he wouldn't get to stay in the crew bunk for very long. Because when the captain had left, the two first officers started looking at the fuel situation, and they really didn't like what they were seeing. For every minute that went by, the difference between how much fuel they should have and what they actually had increased. But in order to call the captain back, they likely felt that they needed to have a really good case to present.
I am really curious to find out which Airbus these guys are using though.
Looking at the weather for their different en route alternates, which I think was an excellent idea. You see, the more valid information that we can collect, the easier the decision making will be in case a diversion will ultimately have to be made. But after about 20 minutes, the relief pilot finally called the captain back to the cockpit. At this point, they had lost about 2.1 tons of fuel, and on top of that, a fuel imbalance had started to form with about 400 kilos less in the left tanks compared to the right. Together, these two facts pointed to a possible fuel leak on the left engine, the number one side, and something now needed to be done. Here, first of all, it's important to point out that an aircraft like the Airbus A330 will easily be able to handle an imbalance of this size. In fact, the imbalance could get as high as 2,900 kilos without any detrimental handling characteristics, and even as high as 7,500 kilos if one of the inner tanks would be full. For a fuel imbalance by itself, there are special procedures to follow, which includes pumping fuel from one side to the other, but obviously we wouldn't want to do that if a fuel leak is suspected, since the very last thing that we want to do is to pump good fuel out through a huge gaping hole somewhere. So when the captain had settled back into the cockpit again, he was briefed by his two colleagues, and together they decided to start going through the fuel leak non-normal checklist from their quick reference handbook, or QRH. Now I know that at this point, some of you might be asking yourself, QRH, but that's a paper checklist. I thought the Airbus A330 had an ECAM system with electronic checklists to follow in case something like this happened. And you would be 100% correct. But the thing is that certain problems can actually be identified quicker by humans than the aircraft systems themselves, and a fuel leak is one of those. The ECAM indeed had such a procedure, but it wouldn't be triggered until the situation had grown considerably worse. So to preempt that, the crew instead used their good old paper checklist. But as we will soon see, the use of this checklist would also come with a bit of bias from the crew, which would make this incident way more complicated. When the captain took up the fuel leak checklist, the very first point said land ASAP, meaning that an immediate diversion was now required. But interestingly, the captain initially didn't pay this instruction much attention. Since they had waited so long with starting the checklist by letting the captain sleep back in the crew bunk for 20 minutes, They had already flown far enough away from their origin airport for it not to be an option anymore. So instead, they were now about 250 nautical miles away from Yaoundé Airport in Cameroon and 520 nautical miles away from N'Djamena Airport in Chad, which were both listed as suitable en route alternates. But the crew were slightly more familiar with N'Djamena Airport. The time was now 22:14, and as the crew continued to work through the checklist, it soon also instructed them to shut down the engine on the site associated with the suspected leak. And here, it's probably worth explaining a bit about what this checklist was trying to achieve. First of all, the reason it had started by telling the pilots to divert was because the aircraft could otherwise find itself running out of fuel, especially if the leak was identified out over an ocean or a desert. But crucially, a fuel leak can also represent a very significant fire hazard, depending on where the leak is located. An uncontrollable fire is probably the single worst emergency that can happen to an aircraft, so there were plenty of good reasons that this checklist was prioritizing a diversion. Secondly, the checklist was created to bring the crew through several steps designed to find out where the leak was actually located. And like I explained in the beginning, if an engine was shut down using the engine master switch, this would isolate the fuel from that engine. So if the leak stopped after the suspected engine was shut down, well then the fuel leak would be confirmed to be in that engine and it could be left alone. But if the leak would continue, well then that engine could possibly be restarted again. And here, the bias that I mentioned before now came into play. Because both the captain and his two colleagues felt that the QRH paper checklist was more of an indicative document and not as decisive as a similar instruction coming from an ECAM checklist. The captain did not want to shut down the engine, and he felt that it was his prerogative to decide on that, not the checklists. And on top of that, his colleagues agreed and also felt a strong hesitation against shutting down an engine. They had all gone through training scenarios in the simulator where they had practiced fuel leaks, and in those scenarios the leak had always been pre-briefed in the classroom, and the actual exercise had been very focused on fuel preservation and the correct use of the checklist, not at all on the complexities of a real-life scenario. So the crew now looked at their situation and didn't see a problem with the fuel quantity. They were flying over Africa with several alternates nearby and plenty of fuel still available, even with this apparent leak. And the main thing's even worse, when the captain was reading through this checklist, it wasn't written anywhere that these steps were also important in order to avoid a fire hazard. So a part of me actually understands why the captain chose to disregard first the instruction to immediately divert and then to shut down the left-hand engine. If he thought that this was only done in order to preserve fuel and for no other reason, well then it actually kind of made sense to wait. Remember, they were cruising at 38,000 feet when this happened, and the single-engine service ceiling of the Airbus A330 would likely have been closer to 26,000 feet with this weight, which meant that they would have had to immediately descend before shutting down the left engine, further limiting their options. As they were discussing this, the captain also added, well, if we choose to shut down the engine, this will be the start of something big, indicating that this was something that he really would prefer to avoid, and his two first officers seemed to initially agree. But here I want to make one thing very clear. The checklists and procedures that we are given are written in a certain way for a reason. They are created by some of the most knowledgeable and skilled people that the aircraft manufacturers have been able to muster, coming from all disciplines imaginable, including pilots, engineers, lawyers, and human factors experts. Those people have then been sat down in a room without any type of stress at all and tasked with finding the safest possible way of dealing with a potential problem, taking into account everything imaginable, including how their guidance will affect other systems, procedures, and safety rules, but also, crucially, lessons learned from previous accidents and incidents. This is actually the reason we have so many procedures, because when the shit hits the fan, we pilots can then lean back on this enormous wealth of knowledge and ready-made decision-making.
But here's my question, guys. So I appreciate, well, he kind of said it a while ago too. So I appreciate that you have a group of people who will come up with these checklists, but there are times when you can't think about everything, right? So I guess that's sometimes why you have some people disregarding certain things, but let's hear what's going to happen.
Knowing that if we just follow these procedures, we will be covered in 99.9% of the cases. Now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use our brains or experience. On the contrary, using these procedures should enable us to free up mental capacity to take the more overarching decisions that have to be taken, or to use our experience if the procedures or guidance doesn't end up solving the problem.
Alright,
In fact,
that
this
makes
is exactly
sense.
what, for example, EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, is also recommending in their guidance material, that the pilot should adapt when faced with situations where no guidance or procedures exist. But here, interestingly enough, Air France had decided to put their own spin on that guidance. In their manuals, they had instead written that pilots should improvise when faced with the unforeseeable to obtain the safest result. You see the small difference? EASA told its pilots to adapt after having used all procedures, while Air France told its pilots to improvise when faced with unforeseeable issues. It was later found that Air France might be encouraging their pilots to be a little bit too keen on improvising outside of established procedures, and that this could lead to the kind of circumstances that we're about to see. In any case, I am quite sure that if this crew would have been able to see what was actually going on inside of their left-hand engine, they would have been much more keen to follow the checklist. As I'm sure that some of you have already guessed by now, the main fuel hose had not been properly fitted after the aircraft's latest engine overhaul. But it had still stayed relatively tight for the preceding 6 flights before this flight, until this time when the flange had likely dropped into position, causing the bolts that were holding it to become much more loose, which then allowed the highly pressurized fuel to start spraying out through the connection. Now there was a drain mounted around the connection which was supposed to divert small amounts of leakage away from the engine below and out through a drain mast, but it was not sized to deal with the enormous amount of fuel that was now gushing out. And this meant that this fuel now started flowing out over the several hundred degrees hot engine components below. So the fuel and heat part of the fire triangle was therefore complete. The only thing that was now needed was the correct amount of oxygen to make the fuel mixture perfect for combustion and a potentially catastrophic fire. But in the cockpit, the aircraft was still heading north at the same altitude. The captain had now asked the 2 maintenance technicians to join them in the cockpit, and together with the relief pilot, they had now gone back to over the wing in order to try and see if they could visually identify the leak. Unfortunately, though, it was pitch black outside, so they couldn't see anything. As they were in the back, the captain gathered some updated weather for Yaoundé, Libreville and N'Djamena, which all looked okay. And as soon as the relief pilot was back, they started going through something known as the 4-deck decision-making model to see what actions they should take. 4-deck is similar to my company's PIOSI, which I talk about in my leadership courses, and it's an acronym used to give structure to decision-making. It stands for factual information collect, options available, risks, decision take, execute the decision, and control or evaluation of the progress. This is an excellent way of dealing with exactly these types of complex situations where there are many possible options to choose from. But the problem here is that this type of model assumes that all applicable non-normal checklists have been completed correctly before this model is started. Because if that's not the case, well then the factual information, the very first part of 4-deck, cannot accurately be completed since not all facts are correct. In this case, for example, if the fuel leak checklist had been completed, they should already be flying single engine at a lower altitude with the fuel leak sorted out. And since the checklist had clearly stated land ASAP, they should already be rechecking NOTAMs and weather for Yaoundé Airport, which was now the closest alternate, and also had a nice 3,400 meter long runway available. But here, as the captain was going through 4-deck, he analyzed the different options and risks as he saw them, and concluded that they indeed had a fuel leak, but that they also had enough fuel to choose a diversion option that they wanted. And the biggest risk, in his opinion, was not the leak, but instead that they would have to end up shutting down one engine and divert single engine. The time was now 22:26, 12 minutes after the fueling procedure had started, and still the aircraft was heading due north along the route. The pilots now started discussing whether to divert to Yaoundé or N'Djamena, and all three pilots thought that N'Djamena had better facilities, and those included some military presence close to the airport, which they felt could be good for security. Keeping in mind here that these were very complicated times in the region that they were flying over. But there was no question that Yaoundé was closer and also had reasonably good weather with a nice ILS approach and a long, nice runway available for them. Now, the captain pointed out that they hadn't finished Fordek yet and therefore could continue heading north whilst they were completing this, and that would get them closer to N'Djamena anyway, basically pushing his own agenda. Again, if they had understood the enormous fire hazard that they were facing, they would have likely acted differently here, but that wasn't the case. At time 22:32, the crew contacted the Air France Operations Control Center, advising of the situation and that they were still debating which alternate to use. And they also indicated that they thought that maybe N'Djamena was more suitable from an operational perspective. The ops controller soon came back and told them that from their side there was nothing stopping them from diverting to N'Djamena, and so the decision was for all intents and purposes taken. But again, if Fordek would have been properly done here, they would have noticed that there was actually more to this decision than they had thought of so far. But we'll get back to that soon. In any case, the captain now also pointed out that they had lost so much fuel that they wouldn't be able to continue to Paris anymore, showing that this had at least for a second appeared as a possibility in his head, but that it had now thankfully disappeared. He now also called in the lead purser to join them in the cockpit and informed her and the rest of the crew of the situation. And here something really interesting happened. You see, when the purser arrived, the captain briefed her about the fuel leak, and he also told her that there would be no need to prepare the cabin in any special way since they intended to make a normal landing in N'Djamena. But when the purser left the cockpit, she drew her own conclusion from what the captain had said and decided to prepare the cabin for a potential evacuation anyway. This is exactly the kind of thinking outside of the box which exemplifies someone with a lot of experience. She knew that she had some extra time on her hands before the landing and decided to use that time to at least be prepared if this fuel leak would turn into something much worse. And if it didn't, well then, no real damage done. Great stuff. As the aircraft was now getting further and further north, they soon passed the point of equal time between Yaoundé and N'Djamena, so N'Djamena was now both the closest and the preferred alternate for the crew. The captain continued expressing his opinion that they should keep both engines running for as long as possible, and that they should only consider shutting the left engine down if the fuel quantity in the associated tank would drop below 5,000 kilos. The reasoning behind that was to avoid any sudden unplanned shutdown due to fuel starvation on short final, for example. He then concluded the Fordek discussion with a formal decision to divert to N'Djamena and anchored that decision with his two colleagues. But I'm not sure if you've picked up on a small but interesting theme in this crew's decision making so far. You see, the idea behind Fordek, or any other similar model, is to try and facilitate the best possible decisions based on everyone's inputs, their experience and available facts. But this discussion had so far been very much driven by the captain, who had both asked questions and then provided the answers. The other two pilots had willingly agreed with his reasoning, which indeed sounded very logical and well thought through, but that's not really the point. When I instruct people on how to use our decision-making model, PIOC, I always tell the leader of the group to let the least experienced person in the room share their opinions first. That way, they can describe how they perceive the threat, and it allows them to form their own opinion untainted by the bias that can come from hearing someone with more experience talk first. Now, this doesn't mean that they will always come up with the best answers, but not so rarely they will actually bring up something that the rest of the group hadn't thought of, and that can have a profound effect on the rest of the discussion. If we look at this situation as an example, the captain did very clearly voice his opinion about not immediately wanting to divert or shutting down the engine, and both of the first officers agreed. But it would have been really interesting to hear what, for example, the relief pilot would have said if he would have been given the chance to talk first, given that he was an ex-simulator instructor on the Airbus A330. In any case, the captain now contacted the N'Djamena area controller and informed him about the situation. They also declared a mayday and requested a diversion down towards the N'Djamena airport, which was immediately facilitated by the controller. The aircraft started to descend, and just as they did, an ECAM message saying "Fuel F used, FOB disagree" appeared in front of the pilots. This meant that now even the aircraft's internal systems had identified the fuel leak and therefore referred the crew to complete the internal ECAM fuel leak procedure. Now remember how I said before that the pilots felt that the QRH checklist contained more soft guidance than the ECAM checklist did? Well, given that, you would think that when the crew was now specifically told to do the same thing, namely to shut the affected engine down by the ECAM, that they would do it. But curiously, that didn't happen. Instead, the captain just deleted the ECAM page, and since a new status message didn't appear, it took that as a confirmation that the procedure had already been completed following the QRH checklist. Funny how powerful self-reinforcement can be. But now the relief pilot finally chimed up and wanted to confirm when the number 1 engine was actually going to be shut down, just so that they all agreed. The fact that he did that would indicate that he at least was getting a little bit uneasy with the fact that the engine was still running. But again, the captain reiterated his view that he preferred keeping the engine running for as long as they had fuel for it, and at this point they also received the latest weather for N'Djamena, which indicated that runway 05 was in use with only some light winds on the ground. But the controller also informed them that the instrument landing system, the ILS approach, was not going to be available for them. The captain asked him to confirm that, and when he did, the relief pilot took up the NOTAMs and realized that there was work in progress close to the threshold of runway 05. So not only was the ILS out, the runway had also been shortened down significantly, meaning that the landing distance was now only 2,410 meters. The relief pilot did a calculation which indicated that they would still be able to land runway 05, even without the use of thrust reversers, which the QRH checklist had forbid them from using. But he also pointed out that the GPS-based RMP approach, which the crew were now planning to use, could potentially cause them some serious problems. You see, the RMP approach was constructed with the original threshold in mind, and since the new landing threshold would be over 400 meters further in, it meant that if they flew that approach, they might have to adjust their approach angle quite abruptly once they broke through the clouds and could see the runway. The relief pilot said that he had done something very similar at a different airport a few months earlier and that it had been very uncomfortable. He therefore suggested that they should use runway 23 instead. The captain took this into consideration, and since the wind on the ground was quite light, he agreed that they should switch over and land on runway 23 with some light tailwind instead. Now these are exactly the kind of things and problems that you might find yourself in if you don't take the time to properly gather all the facts while running foredeck, or if you let your personal preferences get in the way of objective decision making. If they would have taken the time to read through the NOTAMs before deciding on N'Djamena as their alternate, this would likely change their minds. But having said that, it's also obvious here that this captain actually did both listen and appreciate the opinions of his colleagues. That's why he decided to change over to the opposite runway when the relief pilot suggested it. Now unfortunately, runway 23 had another, more hidden problem, something that was actually highlighted in the Air France route manual, and that was a tendency for a very strong tailwind on approach during this time of year. And that could happen even when the winds on the ground were reported as very light.
Alright, let's pause this for a second and let's check our flight real quick. So let's see where we are. We have 296 miles to go. Top of the set is at 171, so at 140. It is now 116, so top of the set is going to be in about 20 minutes or so. So let's check this out real quick. for our arrival into Fiji, we are using the Micax 2 Bravo. And what that means for us is, looking at the chart 10-2, I also need to put the arrival airport information here. And the stands, cool. So we're using the Micax 2 Bravo. Let's see what the text says. From Micax track 052 to Motkey, then cross Motkey at above 4500, max 230. So we're coming in towards Micax. We're not using any of these transitions here. So we're to cross Motkey at or above 4500, which will give us clearance on the eastern side with these little hills here. I said little, but there's some high hills. And so we must maintain between 270 and 360. We must maintain at least 4700. So we'll maintain that above 4500 and then follow the RNAV into runway 20, which tells us that we are to cross Motkey at above 4500, max 230 knots, mandatory at Foxtrot November 664 at 3350. Then we continue a left turn towards Nirev, then Nirev at 2000. By then we should be fully configured to make our final turn into runway 20. Now the Pmdg 737 is supposed to, this is actually a pretty good flight for us to check to see how this aircraft will handle the RNAV, as they would have updated the aircraft. So we are to ensure that we are at Nirev at 2000, and then our decision height is 330 since we are category C. So let's put that in right now as we speak. So we put 330 as our reference, 330 set, and our final approach code is going to be 205. We don't have a, let's see if I can put that in. Let's see if we can make a fix real quick. November, Foxtrot, November. We'll use the airport, and we use 205 as our radial, which would be the runway final approach course for the runway, the heading for the runway. And we'll put a 15-mile radius around, and we'll put a 5-mile. Let's see something real quick. So we will be Foxtrot November 812 is 1.2. Alright, so let's use the 6 radial. So this is going to be 13 and this is 6. So let's put this at 6. And the first one will be at 13. So let's see how this works out. Cool. Alright. So what we're doing here is that by 15 miles out, by 13 miles out, we will make sure that we're at 180 knots. The maximum for Motkey is 230. So we can actually do 180, 190. But I'm going to do 180 since it's going to be a quick, this is going to happen really quickly, guys. So by Motkey, I'll have 180, and then we'll keep 180, come down slower to get to Nirev. By Nirev, we'll slow to our final approach speed, so that by the time we clear that, we should be below 160, which is the max at Foxtrot November 581. And so let's check what the Mr. Approach says. Mr. Approach says track 205 to Micax. hold mandatory at 3000. So we'll go right back to MICAX, hold at 3000 should we have to do the missed approach. Transition level is for level 130. So we put that in our descent. Forecast 130 is already set, so that is ready for us. And so we have our aircraft set up for final approach here with, by the time we get to Nirev, we should be at our final approach speed and also fully configured for the landing. Once we get on the ground in Nandi, let's now get the airport chart up. We will be landing runway 20 and we'll go all the way to the end, turn around, backtrack and exit via Gulf. And our arrival gate today is going to be, let's see, domestic gates are 11, 12, 13 to 17. So we can come on this side. Or should we use the international gates? International gates are 1 through 10. Is this an international flight? We'll figure it out. Probably use between, you know what, we use 10. Let's see. FJI was 330s. Okay, so the 330s usually use that. So probably we could use stand 7 or 8, somewhere around there. But those are the heavy gates, so we probably use stand 10. We use stand 10. Yeah, so we'll use stand 10 once we land and park up, and we'll be good to go. So let's double check our top of descent now. Progress is 116 at 141. I'm gonna go ahead and set the altitude down to 11,000 feet. And then we'll just watch the remainder of the video. Once the aircraft begins to descend on its own, then we'll cut the video there and then move forward. Hope that's cool with everybody. So let's get back to our in-flight entertainment.
Now the captain did mention this as a possible threat, but not how much of a threat it would actually be. Instead, he started talking about the taxi phase, and that he wanted to keep the left engine running until they had vacated the runway.
I'm still trying to figure out which.
Descent,
let me see what.
Go over the controls in order to allow the first officer to start giving his approach.
I'm wondering which 730 A330 they're using. He doesn't say, but that would be interesting to know.
That there was now a visible streak of fuel running under the cowling of the engine number 1 exhaust nozzle. The captain thanked him for this information, but also said that this would not change their action plan. Again, showing that he just didn't fully appreciate the danger of this fuel leak, which was now confirmed to come from the engine. So why am I going on and on about that? Well, there have been previous instances of fuel leaks being disregarded, which has led to in-flight fires. Back in May of 2013, an Airbus A319 had suffered an engine fuel leak after departure from an airport in the UK, and the crew did identify the leak, but then decided not to shut the engine down. And as they started approaching Heathrow, they also started extending flaps, and this caused a change in the airflow around the engine, which allowed the fuel mixture to become just right, and a violent fire ignited. Now, the crew in this case responded by following the engine fire checklist and shut the engine down, something that this captain had also said that he would do in case a fire would happen, but they were unable to get it under control until after they had successfully landed and the firefighters could extinguish it. Now, there have been plenty of other examples as well, so the point that I want to make here is that the chance of a fuel leak-induced fire increases a lot as the aircraft descends and starts configuring. Basically, any changes to the airflow inside of the engine or around the leak can be enough to get a fire started. And this was actually the reason that they weren't allowed to use the thrust reversers with a fuel leak. Now, the first officer went through his approach briefing, and at the end the pilots discussed how they perceived the threats associated with the approach. The first officer pointed out that according to him, the biggest threat was a possible fire on the ground, showing that the risk of a fire connected to a leak was definitely in his mind. But again, the captain reinforced that his greatest threat was that they would have to shut an engine down during the approach, and that this might lead to a single engine go-around and possibly some further holding. Now, after that, he said that it was actually up to the first officer, since he was pilot flying, if he wanted to shut the engine down before the approach. But he then almost immediately restated that their decision was to keep the engine running. Again, kind of asking a question and then answering it himself. The relief pilot now chimed in and reminded everyone that they couldn't use reverses after landing, and the first officer asked him to please remind him of that after landing in case he would forget. To that, the captain added, well, worst case scenario, you can just go to idle reverse, since that's not even reverse thrust, which the relief pilot agreed with. But that just showed again that they didn't really understand why the procedure was written this way. Activating the reversers, even without using much reverse thrust, would still alter the airflow inside of the engine and therefore increase the likelihood of a fire igniting. But I have to say that this could certainly have been better explained in the checklist. They were now getting closer to the airport and therefore started preparing the aircraft for the approach. As they were doing that, they were soon handed over to the N'Djamena approach controller, and at time 23:18, another ECAM warning appeared, this time for fuel imbalance. This once again pointed the crew to the fuel leak checklist and the need to shut the number 1 engine down. And this time, the captain looked through the action items, but again questioned the danger of keeping their engine running. Here he also said that the checklist didn't specifically tell him to shut it down, even though that's exactly what it did, and he also pointed out that there was no mentioning of fire in there. Now that was correct, but this comment indicates that he maybe now started to have some doubts about what was going on. At this point, the relief pilot now spoke up as well and said that he didn't think that shutting down the engine was such a bad idea. But then he quickly followed that up by saying that it wasn't a bad idea to keep it running for the moment either, since they were in the air and there was no emergency. All of this is indicative of something known as groupthink, where the desire for harmony and conformity inside of a group becomes more important than individual differing opinions and therefore leads to flawed decision making. It's really interesting to see this play out, and for anyone out there who's watching and to think that this is really interesting, these are exactly the kind of CRM principles that I love discussing during my live hangouts with my Patreons. If you want to join in the next one, check out patreon.com/join/mentorpilot, and I would love to see you there. Anyway, as they were now descending, the captain soon mentioned that his intention was to shut the engine down at the end of the landing wall and before turning the aircraft around on the turn pad at the end of the runway. But he later clarified that he would base his decision regarding when to shut the engine down on what the firefighters would tell him on the ground. He also started talking about the risk of fire if the fuel would continue to leak out onto the hot brakes situated just behind the left engine, especially since he now started to realize that they would have to brake quite hard without reversers in order to stop on a relatively short runway. So he asked the first officer to modulate the brakes, meaning to basically pump them gently during the landing, but that obviously wouldn't help since the brake energy would still have to go somewhere, and pumping would only mean harder braking during each pump. Now, I just want to point out here once again that had the checklist been executed correctly, they both wouldn't have a fuel leak anymore, since the engine would have been shut down, and they would have most likely have been diverting to an almost 1,000 meter longer runway, where this braking issue would not have really existed. At time 23:28, 1 hour and 14 minutes after they had started the fuel leak procedure, and with fuel still gushing out to their left-hand engine, the crew was now cleared for the RMP approach for runway 23. At this point, they started slowing the aircraft down and configuring it for landing. And they had also decided to use flaps 3 instead of full flaps, just in case the engine would fail during the approach and they would have to do a single engine go-around. Now this was a great idea, but it would have been even better if they would have actually briefed how to do that single engine go-around, since if that would happen, it could quickly get messy. And I mean really messy. And another thing to take into account is, of course, with not flying with full flaps meant that they were now also using a higher approach speed, which would require a longer landing distance. Anyway, soon the aircraft was fully ready for the landing, with both the approach and landing checklists completed, and the aircraft started descending down the RMP glide path. But the pilots quickly noticed that they were struggling to maintain their approach speed because of a 32 knot strong tailwind that was pushing them forward. This was not what they wanted to see, since they knew that the runway was quite short and that they therefore couldn't take almost any excess speed into the landing wall. It's also worth pointing out here that a later calculation based on their weight, temperature, flap setting and speed would show that they needed a landing distance of 2,501 meter, 91 meters more than they actually had available. Now that calculation had a 1.67 safety factor in it, something that we always use for normal landing calculations, and they would definitely need that. Now the Airbus have several clever safety systems built into it, and one of them is something known as the Runway Overrun Warning, Runway Overrun Prevention System, or ROWROPS. This system will continuously and in real time calculate the aircraft's required landing distance and issue a warning if it feels that this distance would fall outside of the available landing distance, including a 15% margin. In the air, that warning would be both a visual and oral: runway too short, which should then trigger a go-around. And if it happened on the ground, the warning would say max braking, max reverse. So as they were now hurtling down towards this relatively short runway, why wasn't this system warning them? Well, remember that NOTAM about runway works that we talked about before? Yeah. The aircraft database had no idea that this was going on, so it thought that it had a full 400 meters more available than what they actually had. Now the first officer did a good job of maintaining the aircraft stabilized during the last part of the approach, and soon the tailwind fell from 32 knots down to below 10. So at time 23:34, the aircraft finally touched down about 550 meters into the runway with a speed of 150 knots, which was about 8 knots above the approach reference speed. So almost immediately, the ROWROP system started shouting out, "Brake, max braking, as it had now recalculated the available distance and saw that it was decreasing fast. The first officer therefore disconnected the outer brake and gradually increased the brake pressure up to max. And this caused all of the aircraft's enormous kinetic energy to be transferred immediately into the brake discs, just behind the steady stream of jet fuel which was still pouring out onto the runway. The aircraft finally managed to slow down to an almost stop, just short of the runway end, and as they came to a stop, the brake temperatures had already risen to 300 degrees Celsius. The relief pilot now suggested that they should finally shut the left engine down, but the captain wanted to make a right-hand turn at the turn pad, and he wanted to use the then outboard left engine to do that.
He's trying to make things difficult. I'm annoyed with this captain. Is anybody else annoyed with what's going on with this captain? Because he's just really trying to do everything he wants to do without listening to what's going on, man.
40% N1 on the now fuel-soaked left-hand engine in order to facilitate the turn. But by some miracle, this still didn't ignite the fuel, and the investigators later theorized that the fuel concentration of the air inside of the engine was likely so high that it effectively hindered the ignition. The aircraft continued to taxi in, and once the turn were complete, the crew finally shut down the leaking left engine. By that point, there was
that's simply what it is. as he said, CRM,
showed that the aircraft had
it's just there's too much of a power struggle inside of that cockpit, which is why a lot of issues would happen. Because so long he could have. Number one, my thing is, these airplanes are equipped to travel on one engine. So if you shut one down, you have all these alternates that are around. Why risk your life and innocent people's lives? Then just shut the engine down and land. You have more than I don't get it. I do not get it.
Risen to an astonishing 600 degrees, and because of that, the crew waited with the disembarkation until they were sure that an evacuation wouldn't be necessary and that the firefighters were in place. Those firefighters also started to douse the area under the left-hand engine with water, and that was probably to dilute and minimize the risk of the brakes igniting the fuel. So in the end, everyone on board this aircraft was safe, which of course was the most important thing. But I think that this was a brilliant example of just how complex and messy things can get if we pilots think that we can outsmart our checklists. The final report quickly determined that the cause of the fuel leak was that mismounted fuel hose connection between the engine and the pylon. And because of that, a recommendation was sent out to all Airbus A330 operators to change out that flange to a new and improved design as soon as possible. Airbus also rewrote the fuel leak curate checklist to really highlight the fire risk, and Air France issued a safety first bulletin, updated their pilot training guidance, introduced a new fuel leak exercise in the sim, and also recommended their pilots to actually follow SOPs. But the BEA still finished off their report with a very serious note to Air France, pointing out that this wasn't the first time that they had found Air France pilots to voluntarily not follow SOPs and checklists. Their very last sentence in the report said that the BEA therefore considers that Air France should put compliance with procedures back into the center of the company's safety culture, which is a pretty harsh statement coming from a national safety agency. Now, I hope that you have found this video fascinating, and if you did, please leave me a like and subscribe to the channel. But if you really liked it and you want to see these videos before everyone else and even impact the content, then join my Patreon crew by going to patreon.com/join/mentor.
Yeah, so I like watching his videos because you'll really get a comprehensive view of what it is that can happen, especially in the flight deck. And like Bayesian plane spotter said, that power trip, there's not enough queue resource management that involves everybody, which definitely could cause problems. And you said it perfectly. A power trip, just because I'm the captain and what I say goes, yeah, ultimately, but that's why you have more than, imagine I'm in this flight deck by myself and literally having to battle all of this stuff. It makes it difficult for me alone to do it on the normal circumstances versus trying to do the same thing when there's a problem. You know, you need all hands on deck. You want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And even though you are the PIC, hearing it from somebody else, you know, just to confirm what you're thinking, it does count for something. So my advice, guys, yeah, I'm no real world pilot, but common sense. If you're working with somebody, it's best that you hear what they're saying and ensure that you put your heads together, because it's not just about you. Especially when you have other lives at stake, you want to ensure that you get or use the best method that's available. Especially with that, there's I don't remember the acronym, but the whole idea of risk assessment and then evaluating all of the options, and the one that seems more what's the word I want to use? The one that seems more or less, I'm trying to figure out the correct term to use, but the one that would involve the least amount of troubles, for lack of a better term. So there's our top of the descent, guys. We have the engines rolling back. and we've entered our top of descent into Nandi. So we're going to run the numbers now for landing. I should have done that earlier, but we're fine. So we need 8,667. We have available landing distance of 10,000, so we can use auto brakes 1. All our reverses are operational. The wind is at 14, so we'll add 10 knots, which will probably increase our landing distance. Yes, it will. But we still have just about 2,000 more, just under 2,000 more feet to go, which is fine. We'll aim to land within touchdown zone, which we can stop and apply our reverse. So we're good to go. Descending out to 11,000 feet. Landing time will be 3 minutes past 2 UTC, which is in the next 20 minutes. So we're just about to get there, guys. Set 1. Seatbelt sign was on all this time, so we don't have to worry about that. Take a quick look on the outside. All these small all these little islands that are in the Pacific here are cool to see, and then you have that little atoll over there. So we are north of the mainland right now, north of one of the islands of Fiji, which is what we're seeing on the left here. So we are very close to our arrival. So what will happen is we will fly northbound. That's weird. Westbound, that's the, yeah, we're flying westbound, southwestbound, and we'll make a left coming around towards the east, and then we'll land with a final heading of 203.05. Where's our chart? The approach chart here, yes. So we'll come downwind, then come around towards Matkey, then we'll make left on the RNAV runway 20 approach. Just to review, we are to cross Nirev at 2000, and let's ensure that we have that. So that's their hard tuned 2000, and we're above 4500. Once we get down towards the first arc to MICAS or MICAS, we're going to do our speed intervention and slow down to our speed of 180, just so that we're able to get down to our final approach speed without having to worry about using too much of speed brakes, so that we will be on profile for final approach. It's going to really be a tight turn, so you want to make sure that when we get to nearer that we're fully set for the final approach into from that base to final turn at Foxtrot November 581. Local QNH is 1013, so we can set that to make sure that that is set. Beautiful. Unlike the Airbus, I can just simply turn the dial and it will remain there until I click the standard button one more time, and that will set the local QNH. The final approach speed, let's set that in 142. I did that wrong. Something just disconnected a while ago. Right, so 149. VNAV speed. And again, we maintain that 4500 because of the mountains towards the southeast of the field. So we want to ensure that we are within our MSA. And as we see here, the say between west and between east and southeast is 4700 on a heading of 360 or 270. We need to ensure that we are above 4500 to ensure that we do not have any issues with the terrain. Weather's on the left side, terrain is on the right side, so we can see that show up there. Landing traffic FJI254 descending through flight level 190 for 11,000. We'll continue descent to cross Mont Key at 4,500. Then the RNAV runway 20 approach. Landing traffic. So there's some green on the terrain map right now. So we have some terrain there. It would only turn yellow to red once we get below a certain altitude or we're within a certain distance and height from them. So everything is green now because we are at 16,000 feet, flight level 160. Seems like we're getting some gusts here. Plane is buffeting left and right. Seems like the airport is trying to give us, the weather's trying to give us a... Why is my internet trying to play games with me? Why is my internet trying to play games with me today? Continue to descend down to... Hopefully you guys are still there. My internet is really playing some tricks today. Always gotta be something. So if you guys are still with me, just let me know in the chat that you're still here. Our speed is coming down as we get ready to descend further. Once we get below 10,000 feet, we will turn on the landing lights. Oh, there's the airfield right here. So this is where we're going to be landing. Seems like we're back. Not sure what's going on with the internet, guys. Please forgive me. I have no idea. But we're going to try to get the plane on the ground. So we're descending now to 4,700. And we're going to try and cross Minka at 45. So here we are. Not Minkas. Minkas is going to be, it will be Motki at 45. So we're on our way down. So we remain 230 for right now. And then once we get to Motki, we will slow down to 180 knots. Landing lights coming on. Start switches is continuous. Wing lights coming on. We're now directly west of the runway here, or in this case south. "12 miles to Motki." We'll start slowing down the aircraft. 220 knots. Get some speed brakes out. Slow this baby down. And this is one of the reasons why you gotta really keep on top of your aircraft, because with all this weather, wind meaning, it's difficult to get the aircraft. It's trying to slow down and also trying to get down to the altitude that we have. So you have to definitely keep on top of the aircraft. 9 miles from Motki, we need to be at least 230, no, the maximum 230. So we're trying to get down to 180 knots now. So let's slow it down to 210. We got speed brakes fully deflected up into the 10, and we're still struggling to get it down. So let's change the level change, which will allow for the aircraft to level off just a bit as we slow down to 210. 6 miles from Motki. Once crossing Motki, we'll then put our altitude to 2,000, which would be what we need to be at for. So it says steep descent after Motki. That's alright. So we're at 210, slow down to 200. And we'll take flaps 1 speed check. So things are going to happen pretty quickly, so we got to try and make sure that we're properly set up. Landing traffic, FJI254, 2 miles from Mott Key, join the RNF runway 20. We'll call final. Landing traffic. Slow down to 180, 1 mile from Mott Key, and we maintain 180 until we are at speed brakes to help the plane to slow down just a bit more, and we'll go flaps 2, speed check, and flaps 5, speed check, so it's across Foxtrot Alpha 664 at 3350. Aircraft should be able to respect that, so we'll allow that to fly down. Arm the speed brakes. We should be good where that is concerned. Once we pass Foxtrot November 664, we will slow down to our approach speed, so that by NIREV we will be at the final approach. Here we go. So slow down to 160. Speed check, flaps 10. And we'll go gear down. Speed now to final approach, which is 149 plus 10 is 159. And we go flap 15. .540 is the final height. Speed check, flaps 20. Flaps 30. And we are fully configured, and we'll continue the approach. Landing checks, landing lights. Touch is continuous. Gear down 3 greens, flaps 30, 30 green light. Speed brake armed, and we are ready to go. So let's land. Final heading is 205. I'm literally testing to see if this aircraft is going to fly all the way down to that let's put 500 because it's supposed to be 540. So let's see. And it's actually flying the arc, which is good. We should have had this when flying into town content.
Terrain, pull up.
And here we go. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Look at that. Nice. My airplane on the rollout. Here we go.
500.
Check. Stabilize the
Approaching
aircraft.
minimums. Minimums.
Continue. Got 2 whites, 2 red. We have that crosswind coming in, so we're gonna try and crab it.
100. 50. 30. 20. 10.
And we're down. Speed brakes up. 2 in reverse. Woo! Guys, I was here sweating. Manual braking. Reverses, lights out. 70 knots. Woo-wee. Stop the timer, 1 hour and 51 minutes. So the aircraft actually flies the RNAVs pretty nicely. So that is nice. That is nice. And I'm sure he didn't call on final with the airport. My apologies. There isn't anybody landing right now. There is another aircraft that is coming in from Brisbane. But he's still a good ways out, so we should be fine. Landing traffic, FJI254 landed, and the backtracking runway 02 will exit via Bravo. We're expecting gate 10 for Bravo. So let's check this now. Airport stands. So we're gonna exit via. Don't do this to me, Pmdg. Don't do this. When you need the charts right away, they're just not there. Right, so we're gonna exit via Gulf and then taxi to gate 10. Well, look at that. I did not know that there was traffic at the airport. Very well. Look at that. So we're gonna get off of this runway as quickly as possible. So we're going to taxi about 30 knots. Let's see what my landing was like. Landing was minus 174, not bad. Start the APU. And we can turn off our landing lights. Let's get GSX to get our gate prepared, and we're going to, wow, there's nothing available there. Let's change that. 9 through should be. Oh, great. They're walking gates. That's nice. So let's try this again. So we'll do gate 10. So we can see our passengers walking through, walking out. Good. Stand 10. No need, no follow me. And we have Fiji as a handling. Good. So we get to see the passengers walking on the airplane today. Nandi traffic. Fiji 254 coming up on taxiway Gulf to exit stand 10. Nandi traffic. So I think that's him over there, probably waiting for us to get out of the way, so try to do that as soon as possible. Slow down. Natty traffic. Fiji 254 clear of runway 20 via Gulf, right Bravo, left into stand 10. Strobes can come off, wing can come off, and we have our APU ready, and we can turn off the terrain and the weather, and our stand is to the right over here. Runway turn off lights can come off. That's 8. Nine and 10 right here with the marshaller. Taxi light come off. Slow down just a bit. And we make this left turn into and we're right on the money. Nice. And stop. Parking brake is set. We have APU on the buses, and we can take off our fuel. Pause the timer here, 2 hours and 8 minutes. All right, just a little bit more than what we anticipated. And once you get down below 10%, turn off the beacon. We can go ahead and call for GSX to deboard. Start deboarding.
Boarding requested.
Oh, now you want to do that. Okay, cool. No problem. Set the chocks. Alright, below 10%, beacon can come off. And we can set the overhead panel up. Seatbelt signs coming off. If the probe seats come off, bleeds come on. APU gen. And GSX will ask us if we want to put on the ground power. We'll answer that once it gets there. And here we are. Guys, we have made it to Nadi, Fiji.
Passengers deboarding started.
And we will watch our passengers deboard from the aircraft. Thank you so very much for joining on today's flight, guys. It was a pleasure flying with you, and you be in our company. I am the one being in your company. Thank you so very much for joining on today's flight from Faleolo. There we go, Faleolo in Samoa, over to Nadi, Fiji, where the flight time was 1 hour and 51 minutes, gate to gate 2 hours and 8 minutes. On aboard the 737-800 from Pmdg. Pretty nice flight. It was a nice smooth one, and I really enjoyed that one. I certainly did. Hope you did as well. If you did, feel free to leave a like. Of course, that would definitely help the channel. Also, if you haven't already done so, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss the next time that we go live. Hopefully we can go live again next week, Tuesday. If not before then, I mean, we could probably do an impromptu live either tomorrow, either Thursday or Friday, or even on Sunday. So feel free to stay tuned for the next flight. And look at that, our passengers are going up the stairs. That is awesome. That deserves a photo right there. Passengers going around the cone like they should, unlike the unruly ones that are in real life that would want to walk under the wing. Passengers are deplaning. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Until the next time, do enjoy the remainder of your day or night. And of course, take care of yourself. Until next time, see ya.